Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this campaigns breakfast. My name is Sofia Parent. I'm Policy and Campaigns Coordinator for the Sustainable Food Places Programme at the food and farming charity Sustain. And I'm joined by my colleague Bella. She's Local Action Officer at Sustain. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion on peri-urban farming. We're joined by excellent speakers today. We'll have Rebecca Lawton from the Land Workers Alliance talking to us about the concept of food zones and why we need more food growing in the periphery of cities. We will have Ario Feldman from Sustain to talk about the Fringe Farming project and what has been learned over the last few months on that project and the policy recommendations that are coming out of that. And finally, we'll have Steph Weatherall from Bristol Food Producers to take us through action that is happening across Bristol. And just for those who don't know the Sustainable Food Places Programme, the programme is run by Sustain, the Soil Association and Food Matters, and we support a growing network of food partnerships all across the UK. So in each food partnership brings together the public sector, the private sector stakeholders, community and voluntary sector organisations, and they work together to improve the food system locally. So check if there's a food partnership in your area. Join forces with them, and if there isn't, consider forming one in your area. So in terms of the program for today, we are going to hear from our speakers. Each will have 10 minutes. You can ask clarification questions, but after the three speakers have their turn, we will have time for questions and answers. At that point, at the end of the questions and answers, we'll break out into different rooms. So you expressed what was your specific interest when you registered for this session. So you'll be able to join a discussion on that theme. And my colleague Bella will explain how to join. And we'll have our discussion in breakout groups, and we'll convene again at the end to share what we've learned and with the other groups. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Rebecca Lawton to share with us her presentation.
Right. Can you all see and hear, not see me, but see the presentation?
Yes, looks good.
Great, thanks. Good morning, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to just briefly speak about the concept of food zones and why we need more farms around cities. Hang on, why is it not moving on? Sorry about this. Pressing the arrow button and nothing's happening. I'll just come out of it again, and
I'm happy to share your slides if you'd like me.
That would be great if I say next each time.
No problem.
I'm sorry about that. Okay. Oh, thank you, Bella. Could you move on to the next slide, please? So yes, it's a real pleasure to be here today, not least because the origins of the Land Workers Alliance horticulture actually arose from an idea I had at a conference when the Food Foundation's when the Vegetable Cities programme that Sustainable Food Places announced in 2017 was announced at the Food Foundation's Vegetable Summit. So Land Workers Alliance, I think probably most of you are familiar with it, but it's a union for small and medium scale agroecological land workers, so farmers, growers and foresters. But because horticulture really lends itself to small scale production, we have quite a large proportion of our members are growing fruit and vegetables, although we are becoming more diverse by the year in terms of the other farming that happens on Land Workers Alliance members' farms. But I realised at a fairly early stage that horticulture is something that can be a really productive way of producing food at a small scale, and became quite involved with the Food Foundation's Peas Please campaign, which is a campaign to try and get people to eat more vegetables. And at their vegetable summit in October 2017, they announced, well, they had various pledges from industrial leaders, from retail and catering and so forth, about how they were going to get more people to eat vegetables. But the production side of it seems definitely the weakest. And when the idea of vegetable cities in association with sustainable food cities was announced, I started visualizing the idea of every city around the UK having these rings of market gardens around them based on the growing communities model food zones. And really that's informed our horticulture campaign. And I'll just very quickly run through our vision, which is that we're aiming to have tasty, fresh and affordable fruit and vegetables available for all, not just those who can afford premium produce. We're wanting local produce to boost local economies and really get trade going within local economies. And we're wanting to move away from the centralized supply system, which supermarkets depend on, to a much more decentralized supply system where food is grown much more locally to where it's produced. We want to make sure that all of our members are able to generate viable livelihoods that pay the living wage, and that there's really rewarding, satisfying, meaningful employment for people on farms and market gardens. And finally, we're aiming for people to be much more connected to their food and understanding how it's produced so that they can actually support sustainable production that creates diverse green spaces. So since the horticulture campaign began, a lot of my time has been very much involved in advocating for small and medium scale growers. And I haven't had as much time as I'd like to really develop this idea of the food zones, which is why coming to this seminar is so important to me, because I really want to connect with sustainable food places and the food partnerships to try and bring this vision into reality. If you could move on, please, Bella. So this diagram of the food zones may or may not be familiar to you. I'm not going to go into all the detailed writing, but I've put the website for Growing Communities where this comes from. Growing Communities created the food zones concept as a sort of stylized idea of what they're aiming for in terms of food supply around cities. So they're looking at encouraging, wherever possible, people to grow their own food, and also as much as possible to be grown and traded within urban areas. And these percentages are based on the growing communities' distribution of how they get the vegetables that they're supplied with for their box scheme. They're supplying about 1,200 people around Hackney in London. So the next ring, number 2, is the peri-urban land. And the idealized situation would be that people are getting about 17.5% of their food from peri-urban farms. That's farms sort of just on the outskirts of cities that are easily accessible by people in cities. And then the bulk of fruit and vegetables, ideally we'd be getting from within 100 miles of the city in the rural hinterland. So if you add all of those together, basically about 60% of food is coming from either the urban or the peri-urban or the rural areas. But the thing I like about the food zones model is that it's pragmatic and it recognises that people do want to eat things from further afield, and it's not always possible to get all your food grown regionally. So while those first three they tend to trade direct with, the others, the rest of the UK, the rest of Europe and further afield, that other 40%, are usually accessed through wholesalers, and it enables people to buy predominantly local food, but also to eat the odd orange or banana. And I'd really urge you to go to the Growing Communities website, because there's a delightful narrative that goes with the food zones model. It's really quite entertaining. So I'm just briefly going to run you through a couple of examples of places that have food zones operating, not necessarily modeled directly on the food zones, but you can identify urban, peri-urban and rural and further afield suppliers. If you could move on, please, Bella. So the first example I'm going to use is Regather Sheffield, which many of you may be aware of this box scheme, which supplies about 650 produce boxes a week. They're not just supplying fruit and vegetables, although within the horticulture campaign, we've been mainly focusing on the horticulture products that they supply. And Regather Sheffield is a community enterprise cooperative. Gareth Roberts, who set it up, I heard him talk quite recently, and it was interesting that actually their objective at the beginning was to set up a community enterprise co-op, and the fact that it happened to be food was a sort of secondary consideration, because that arose as being a need and something that lent itself to being run as a community enterprise co-op. But the fundamentals of it are very much based on the idea of the cooperative movement and community enterprise. And Regather Sheffield, while they have their own farm, which actually I'm afraid I've made a bit of a mistake here. I meant to put Regather Farm on here. It's right near Sheffield Organic Growers, but that would fall within the rural hinterland. So Regather have their own farm, the Regather Farm, on rented land. And then there
Rebecca, just to give you a 2-minute notice.
Okay, I will very quickly run. Okay, so I won't go through all the different ones here, but we will move on to the next slide, which illustrates that this isn't just something that applies to cities. I've also been looking at Broome in Somerset, where there's a food hub, as an example of how rural networks can operate within the food zone. So the urban here is urban in terms of a market town, but there's a field to fork community growing project. Then there are various market gardens in the peri-urban area, and then they're accessing vegetables from the rural hinterland around them. And I'm just going to quickly move on to the final slide, because I think it's really important to spell out why we need food grown around cities. Cities are where most people are concentrated, and it makes sense to be growing food where there are people. It also gives them access to green space and nature, and agroecological peri-urban farms tend to be a lot more diverse than more industrial farms. And because the farms are close to where people are, it's much easier for people to access them for school visits, open days, and volunteering and so forth, which builds food understanding and connection, and therefore builds support for agroecological production. And I've been finding through some other work I'm doing that it's actually, this really helps agroecological producers to have markets that are secure, whereas actually supermarkets tend to be driving so much of the bad practice on industrial farms. There are also significant physical, mental, and dietary health benefits from volunteering, and connecting people to food grown around cities builds community and connection. So I'm sure lots of these themes will come up in the rest of the presentation, but I will leave it at that for now. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I really enjoyed that presentation, and understanding the food zones concept a bit better is not just something aspirational, but it's actually something that is working in practice already. So thank you for those case studies. So if you have questions for Rebecca, or indeed for any of the speakers, feel free to use the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So next we have Ario Feldman from Sustain. He's going to talk to us about the Fringe Farming project that he leads at Sustain, and some of what he has been learning over the last few months, and some of the policy recommendations as well. Ario, you have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And thank you, Sophia and Bella, for inviting me and allowing me to share what the Fringe Farming project is all about. So I don't want to repeat too much what Rebecca's already said. But it does give a good context to what Fringe Farming is. So in terms of food zones, the importance of peri-urban farming and providing fruit and vegetables, especially horticultural production, is really important, and something that needs to be done, and something that hopefully the Fringe Farming project can contribute to. So in the first slide, I have the logos of all the partners at the bottom, including Regather Farm, which Rebecca introduced in Sheffield. We also have Food Sense Wales, which are based in Cardiff, shared assets based in London, but kind of one of our national partners. Capital Growth is our London regional partner. Bristol Food Producers, you'll hear from Steph. She kind of coordinates that. And then Land Workers Alliance, which Rebecca's part of. And then we have the Glasgow Community Food Network, pictured there. And then of course Sustain, which is where I sit. Okay, so just to give a quick introduction of what the Fringe Farming project is, what we're trying to do is to grow the movement for peri-urban farming across the UK. So again, just to repeat, it's providing we're mainly providing fresh fruit and vegetable production, and also supporting local food systems, so short supply chains, improving food infrastructure, but more at a localized level. And what's unique about the peri-urban kind of areas is kind of the gray area between urban and rural. So it's kind of full of potential. It's a mix of urban populations and urban activities, but also rural activities and rural populations. And so yeah, there's a lot of potential there. And what I've underlined, agroecological benefits. So agroecology is really taking center stage in what we're promoting. So issues about environmental and social justice, farming according to principles that are good for the planet, but also for the people. So just a quick run through of what's happened in the project. So we're currently in year 2 of the project. In year 1, which I should also say I joined in year 2, so I wasn't part of year 1, but I can still tell you what it was all about. So in year 1, we were working on the ground with the local partners to form action plans. And alongside this, we had the Peri-urban Practitioners Forums. So this was a place for gathering peri-urban growers and farmers and kind of wannabe or new entrants to peri-urban farming as well. And then allowing them to share resources and experiences, and also their own challenges and opportunities to overcome these challenges. And it's something which actually Rebecca is doing in the 2nd year. And then at the end of the year, we're trying to kind of join the dots and create more cohesive picture of what can be done at the more kind of regional and national scale. So then now we're in year 2, so this is much more about kind of implementing local action plans, and then also working at the national policy level. So in June of this year, we had a parliamentary event in which we invited politicians from kind of across the board, so Conservatives, Tories and peers, Conservative, Labour's party and peers. And then and now towards the end of the year, we're kind of building up more to a kind of campaign kind of format. So trying to create change, and that will help hopefully kind of lead into year 3, if there is a year 3. So it's kind of a question mark at the moment because it depends on funding. So year 3 would be more about kind of implementing this campaign and kind of really lobbying for change, and so forging political alliances. And then also, so because we have partners in Cardiff and Glasgow, we would want another partner in Northern Ireland, for example, and really kind of concentrating, or at least spreading our focus to the devolved nations, because we are very England and actually London centric. So it makes sense to have a more generalized view of the UK. So just to give a bit of context before I go into the kind of the lobbying kind of asks that we're doing. So I mean, these are probably quite obvious to all of you. So the issues are public health. I think Rebecca's already mentioned these already. So in terms of physical, mental and dietary health, but both the individual and kind of community and structural level. And then we have the climate emergency. So we really need to be thinking about farming in a way that's not extractive or destructive of nature, and actually can contribute and promote environmental benefits. And also we have the cost of living crisis. So yeah, this is something that we're all facing, and we really need to be thinking about how to ease costs and also impoverished communities, and how to kind of get them up the ladder a bit. And then also there's a big one, it's the lack of diversity in farming. So the farming sector is massively homogenous. It's overwhelmingly white, it's straight and very old. It's getting older as well. So yeah, we really need to be thinking about how to get younger farmers in there, and from more diverse backgrounds, because we'll be facing huge challenges and we need to be able to adapt to them. So doing things in the same way is not going to help. And then yeah, another big one is land competition. I'll also be facilitating the workshop on land access. So land competition's a massive barrier, especially in terms of, or at least an example would be in terms of greenbelt land, which are supposed to be protected, but you still get kind of land speculation and land given to development, and that obviously means land being taken away for other purposes, such as food growing in a kind of agroecological way. So what are we asking for? So I think it's really important to highlight that we're kind of looking at a holistic or integrated package. So it's not enough to kind of provide one thing without the other, especially when we're talking about new entrants to farming. So for example, if you're providing land to farmers, but they're not trained in farming.
Mario, giving
yeah.
you a 2-minute notice.
Okay, I'm quite close to ending. Yeah, so so you can't have one without the other. And same goes with training. There are people who really want to farm and who have kind of gone through the process of learning how to farm, but they just cannot get a hold of land. And so yeah, so we're calling on the government to kind of provide, or at least to be thinking about ways to provide kind of this integrated package. And then yeah, as I mentioned, land access is a big issue, and so local authorities and other public institutions, we need to call on them to make it easier for people to access land. So for example, council land, I mean, it's not the council's fault, the local council's fault. I mean, they're really underfunded, and this is one way that they can get a bit of money. So it's really important the government kind of fund local councils so that they don't have to sell off their land. I mean, the UK is massively privatized in terms of land, and so we don't want that to be exacerbated even further. And then just a few kind of schemes which are relevant to what we're doing. So we have the new entrant support scheme. It's the government scheme. It's currently in pilot stage. And then we have the environmental land management scheme, which is paying farmers for providing environmental services. And then we have the net zero, which is, as the name suggests, about kind of carbon capture, and then we have leveling up, which is about supporting impoverished communities. I think this is my last slide. So these are resources that you can access if you want to find out more. I think Sophia or Bella will share the slides, so you can click on the links if you want as well. And sorry, actually, there's one more slide. So these are a few questions I have for you, which will go into the breakout session. So one is about if we came up with a fringe farming toolkit, is this something that you would want in terms, so for example, with a toolkit which would help you, or would aim to help you kind of get into peri-urban farming, what's involved, and how would this help you? And then second thing, as I mentioned, we want fringe farming to be more of a campaign. So if that was something that you could hook onto, what would you like to see in that campaign? And the third one, which won't be in the workshop, but more something if you want to email me about, is if we wanted to create a fringe farming network beyond kind of the core group, is this something that you would be interested in joining? And if so, is there any volunteers who would want to coordinate this in your own time, as it would be kind of a more autonomous or self-organizing network as we would see it. And so yeah, with that, thank you for listening to me, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ario. I'm sure those policy recommendations resonated with a lot of people here. And if you have any answers for Ario on those questions, you don't have to wait for the breakout rooms. You can come at the end of our third speaker and share with us all. And thank you, Bella, for putting a link to the Fringe Farming report on the chat. We will also circulate Ario's presentation to everyone at the end. So don't forget to use the chat to ask questions to our speakers. We'll come to them at the end. And lastly, we're going to hear from Steph Wetherall, a case study from Bristol. She'll take us through everything they've been doing over the last few months on this agenda.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Let me just get my presentation up. Great. So I am the coordinator for Bristol Food Producers, and we're basically working to try to get more local food produced in and around the city, and kind of get more food into the city as well. We are a membership organisation. So we have about 100 members, of which about 30 are producer members, and we kind of go up to around 50 miles out of Bristol. But we also have business members, and we have supporter members as well. Our aims are kind of loosely supporting people with access to land, and this is especially kind of new entrants, helping them get onto land. Access to training, so that's a lot of signposting and supporting people to kind of try to find training in agroecological farming and food production. Access to markets, so helping people work out how to sell their produce, and also some work around kind of building a stronger network and advocating for producers. So a lot of it is I do a lot of consultation with farmers, and then I go to the meetings so they don't have to, in summary. So we're a relatively small organisation. I'm the only person kind of paid working, and I currently work a day a week, so we don't have a huge amount of capacity. We've been going for about 7 years. Bristol has a really strong history of food production. So this is a picture from 1897 of the kind of Market Gardeners Association, and historically a lot of the food came from the northeast corner of the city. So if you know Bristol, like There's a strip of grade 1 agricultural land that goes along what is the edge of the M32 now. But historically, that's where a lot of the food was produced. To give you a little bit of a context of the situation in Bristol, we do have a number of kind of urban, peri-urban and rural farms that contribute, a fair amount of produce coming into the city. However, a lot comes in through the wholesale market still. About 7 to 10 years ago, we had quite a number of new farms setting up and starting up, but in the last kind of 6 years, it's really, really slowed down. And majority of that is due to access to land. It's the kind of major barrier that we're facing in Bristol. Land is ridiculously expensive and there's a lot of competing priorities. Housing's a massive issue in Bristol as well, and so there's a kind of constant battle. So we've lost a lot of our agricultural land to development. So if you look at that kind of grade 1 strip now, we've got a lot of houses on it, we've got sports pitches on it, and not much actually being used for farming any longer. Bristol City Council own quite a lot of land, including quite a lot in the peri-urban. So they own some of those small holdings along the motorway. They own quite a lot of land up in the northwest of the city, a bit in the south. They do not have a huge amount of resource. So around 6-7 years ago, they made the kind of small holdings and allotments officer redundant, which coincided with the slowdown of new farms starting in Bristol. So there's a lot of kind of underutilized land. There's horses grazing on agricultural land, and there's definitely people not using the land to its kind of full potential or kind of being managed well. And equally, a lot of privately owned land is used for kind of grazing horses because that's what people can get the most money for, or being held on for potential development in the hope that it will be built on at some point and I'll get some money for it. At the same time, we're seeing a huge rise in young people wanting a career in farming. So we have a survey that people can fill in if they're looking for land, and in the last 6 years we've had over 100 people fill it in. I'd say at the moment I kind of get 1 or 2 people a month who are actively looking for land in the area. There's been a lot of work in Bristol, the Who Feeds Bristol report, the Gold Sustainable Food Cities Awards, the One City Plan, and we're currently working on a Good Food 2030 plan in the city. However, to kind of go along with that, there's not always been a whole lot of action at the kind of council side of things. So as part of the Fringe Farming programme, so we've been part of it for 18 months. We did an online stakeholder event in May 2021. We kept it quite small. There's been a lot of kind of public facing events and big consultation events in the past, and I think a lot of that work has been done, so we kept it really to the core stakeholders. We've chosen to focus quite heavily on Bristol City Council owned land because it feels like the first battle. The land is there, and if we can kind of unlock that, then there's so much potential. So we produced a briefing document which kind of covered the local context, our research, and a bit of the national situation, and circulated that. I think what really helped for us is that it was put together quite heavily by Sustain and Shared Assets, with a lot of work from us as well, but it kind of spoke the right language to the council and has been really well received. And has kind of become a document that I see referred to within the council. And we've been doing a kind of bit of a programme of engagement with lots of different levels of people within a council. So I've been meeting with local MPs, we've taken them out to some farms, we've been in touch with councillors, we've been working with the cabinet member, and the kind of on the ground officers. And actually the work we've been doing with the Good Food 2030 kind of plans help with that, because the council are engaged with that process. So sometimes it's about working out what the council are engaged with and kind of meeting them in that place. Our key asks as part of the Fringe Farming briefing we produced were to have clear aims and objectives for the assets that they have, to adequately resource their team to kind of manage the land, to implement a process for matching up land with new entrants, protect their land from development, and recognise training as a skills priority. It's been a bit of a mixed bag. We've made more progress in some areas than others. Bristol City Council is currently creating a parks and green spaces strategy and a kind of separate kind of small holding strategy. which we've kind of fed into both of those. So that's really like, I mean, those would have happened anyway, but I think the input that we've been able to kind of put into those has been really significant. They've recently reinstated their small holdings and allotments manager. Again, I don't think it was particularly that we asked for that, but I think it definitely helped justify it at their end. And they're currently gathering the leases on their land and mapping their land. So like this information that we've been kind of trying to get for the last 6-7 years is kind of finally happening. As the kind of small holding strategy gets done, we're hoping to start working with them a bit more into a process as how land gets allocated and matched, and input into the like what land's used for allotments, what's used for community growing, what's used for commercial growing, and then who gets that allocation, because that's a key question. And I think they're really keen to talk to us about that, and they've been asking us what information we kind of would need about land. Protection, we're really pressurizing especially the kind of best and most versatile land to be protected. So that kind of grade 1 land, grade 2 land, 3A. It's a kind of constant source of stress in the city around housing, and we're just really keen that we don't lose any of the kind of current growing land. Training, at the moment we're mostly, there is training funding more focused at the West of England Combined Authority level. So we're kind of supporting some work that's happening and trying to leverage some of that.
Steph, just giving you a 2 minute.
Got one slide left, so I'll be fine. So I guess our kind of key learnings, I mean, local authority processes just take a really long time. I mean, I've been working with the council for 6 years now. And a lot of it is around building relationships and just accepting that things move slowly, which is really frustrating. And it's about being realistic about what's possible. I mean, we could go in with some really visionary asks for them, but they do not have the resource. That's just the reality of it. So we're trying to keep our asks kind of reasonable and within what's possible whilst pushing them. And that's actually had a lot more kind of success than kind of going in with something that's completely unrealistic within the current capacity. And the other learning is about leveraging support at every level. So, you know, from MPs down to individual officers, like different blockages and problems require people at different levels. And where an officer might not be able to action something, perhaps a councillor can, perhaps an MP can help unblock that. So I guess that's my kind of key learning. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Steph. Really interesting presentation. I think probably for everyone on this workshop, it is so obvious and compelling why we need more growing at the fringe of cities. But let's not forget that we still need to make the case for those with influence to change things. And that we need to work at all levels and use all routes there are available. I think that's something you conveyed really well, Steph. So if you have burning questions for our speakers, put them in the chat or feel free to unmute and put them directly to the speakers. We have about 5 minutes for that. There were a few requests for sharing resources and reports. We shall do that when we send you the recording of the session and the PowerPoint presentations. But any questions for our speakers, please feel free to type them or unmute now.
I know it's shocking.
Otherwise, I would like to pick on this, use whatever routes are available to you to push, you know, the policy recommendations that we've been talking about. And I noticed in the chat a really interesting example from Lincolnshire. Laura has been trying to push some of the fringe farming recommendations into the local climate action plan. And I thought it would be an interesting example. So Laura, if you want to share very briefly what you're doing. It might be of interest for everyone here. Otherwise, we'll move straight into the breakout groups for more discussion.
I'm not sure I can elaborate much further than that, but as a food partnership, we have representation on the Lincoln Climate Commission, which is aiming to create a climate plan for the whole of the city with like multiple stakeholders. So yeah, they've accepted and acknowledged the value and importance of a number of your recommendations. So that's really good. Thank you for making that available and giving it the weight that it's got with them.
And this leads us really nicely for the second part of the workshop, which is to go into the breakout rooms to discuss who we need to influence, who we need to lobby to overcome some of those barriers. So Bella is going to explain us how we can choose what discussion group to join. There is a link to a Miro board where we can kind of contribute with our thoughts. So Bella, do you want to lead us through what's going to happen in the next part of this session?
Yeah, of course, no problem. So you all sort of expressed interest already in which rooms you'd like to be in, but we're going to let you choose yourself this morning which room to join. So there's 3 options available. On the menu panel at the bottom of your screen, if you move your mouse around the bottom of Zoom, you should see an option for breakout rooms. It's a square made up of 4 squares. And if you click on that, then there should be a list of 3 breakout rooms that appear, one called Access to Land, one called Access to Markets, and one called Skills and Training. And to the right, I'm seeing a few shaking heads. No. If you click on the More button on your bottom panel with 3 dots above it, and then there should be a breakout rooms option there.
See a More button, to be honest, but maybe that's just me.
Okay, no problem. Well, in that case, I will assign your rooms for you. If you can edit your names and put a number at the front of your name, then I can assign you those yourself. So to rename yourself, you hover over your own picture, and in the top right of your image, there'll be 3 dots. Eloise says she's got a breakout room now. Has anyone else? Amazing. Okay, so you should see a square there with 3 squares, with 4 squares in it, and there should be breakout rooms available.
I've only got room 1 available.
Yeah, same.
Have you unassigned me as host, Sophia? Because I set up the 3 breakout rooms before. Can you make sure I'm co-host again?
Yes,
You are
I'm
co-host.
seeing a list of everyone.
Okay, I think someone has taken over the breakout room command from me because I assigned 3 rooms already.
Right. I don't know whether it's me, but I seem to look like I could assign people if I wanted.
Okay. Do you have other options available to you there, B? Because my options have disappeared as if I'm no longer co-host.
Right. I mean, I've got the breakout rooms box open, and I can either close all rooms or broadcast message to all. And I've got the option to assign people.
These aren't. Could all of the co-hosts and hosts unselect the breakout room option for me? Because I think that might be where the problem is. The control's been taken over from me.
Okay. Should we make you full host if we somehow relinquish being co-host with that?
Welcome back to the plenary. We're a bit delayed, apologies for that, but it would be really good to hear from volunteers from both groups on what has been shared on the 2 discussion groups. Do I have a volunteer to report back from group 1 that looked at access to land?
Yep. So just looking at the mirror board, what are the problems and barriers? And one of the barriers was knowing who owns what land. One of the issues was there being affordable housing near land, that farmhouses were being sold off separate from land, so that there was houses and then there was land with no accommodation on the land. There was a problem with accessing land being dependent on particular individuals and councils, and there not being a clear policy or procedure for accessing land. So if a council officer, for example, moves on, then there's sort of no way of accessing land. It was noted that councils don't have money to protect the land that's there existing or to look after it, so they're looking for communities to take on land, but the processes are really slow then for people to access it. There's a link there for Land in Our Names, who outline a campaign around the structural barriers to people of colour accessing land. There's obviously competition for housing, which is a really pressing issue, that there's more and more population, more and more housing needed, but then more and more land needed to grow the food that the people are going to eat. So that's a big issue. I think that's everything on that one. And then examples, people are working with local developers to get temporary access to land, and also to influence them to design their developments with food growing land included. Somebody has in there that a university started a procurement working group. I put in the Community Land Advisory Service, which is part of Social Farms and Gardens, can help people, for example, with template leases, with negotiating leases with landowners, and also can work with landowners as well to make their processes more accessible. Yeah, that's everything I see in there. And then what needs to change at the local and national level. So mapping land, for example, through Land Explorer, building relationships with local council officers, clear policies and frameworks. And I was saying about the Sustainable Food Places framework is a good one, because it just has some clear targets that everybody can be working to around coming up with clear policies within councils for access to land. Yeah, there's potential in planning policy at a council level for requiring new developments to include food growing land. And then in the Netherlands, there was some examples of this same thing of planners and new developments having food growing land around its periphery, and encouraging people to grow in their front gardens as well. So that's sort of building trust in the community around the practice of food growing. I think that's everything.
Thank you, Miriam. And judging by the mirror board, I think you've had a really fruitful discussion. So thank you for that. I was just saying that I'll speak to Ario and Bella, but we're going to try and encapsulate everything that was shared in a blog, and we'll send to everyone later, because some people had to leave. So from group 2, access to markets. Rebecca, do you want to tell the others what we spoke about?
Yes, certainly. We also had a good and far-ranging discussion. We started off talking about public procurement processes as a way of accessing markets, and the experiences that they're having in Bristol with just the slow rollout of dynamic procurement. And despite dynamic procurement supposedly being accessible to small-scale producers, in actual fact it isn't. And so there was a proposal that actually if you can't change the system, then maybe train the producers so that they're better suited to selling into the dynamic procurement system. But then we also talked about whether there was potential for the caterers and chefs who are getting the food to be trained in things like seasonality and climate-friendly food, so that they're designing menus to better utilize local food. And apparently in Bristol, they're actually doing peer-to-peer training for caterers. So getting caterers who already know about climate-friendly food, talking to other peers to sort of share the knowledge, where there's more of a network of trust between caterers already. But then the conversation moved on to being more about private access to individual customers, and the issue of a lot of community and community supported agriculture schemes and local food schemes finding that customers are dropping off because of the cost of living crisis, and that this is causing quite a problem. There was a proposal that local councils could actually be encouraged to do a declaration of support for local food. And then Andrew Derling was talking about in Eastbourne, while there are a couple of agroecological farms who seem to be managing to sell their produce quite well at the moment. The Eastbourne CIC are having trouble. There's apparently Eastbourne Council are actually creating a food street much more as a tourism measure. And Eastbourne CIC have been lobbying to have a food hub be part of that food street. So far, that's not been possible, but they're not giving up yet. And finally, there was a plea to make sure that where food hubs are being set up, to be aware that lots of tech platforms that are there for food hubs aren't necessarily open source. And it's really important to actually make sure that access to food through tech platforms remains accessible to people of all incomes and doesn't become privatized the way things like Spotify are becoming. So people are encouraged to use the Open Food Network, which is an open source platform. And finally, I just wanted to do a quick plug for the Peri-urban Practitioners Forum, which is part of Fringe Farming. The next one will be on the 3rd of October, and it will actually be on marketing for connecting food producers and peri-urban practitioners with markets. So any of you that are interested to come would be very welcome, and Sophia will circulate details about it in the next few days with all the other stuff that comes out of this session. And that's it from the marketing group.
Thank you, Rebecca. If you can send me the details of that meeting, I'll make sure it goes with presentations and recording from today. Thank you so much for everyone that stayed until the very end. We're 5 minutes late. There's lots of good ideas here. I hope you had answers to some of your questions, Ario. And let's talk about encapsulating what we've learned and all the examples we've heard from today in a blog. And yeah, keep your eyes and ears open for a future webinar on peri-urban farming, because there's plenty to share. And if you have ideas for future campaign breakfasts, yeah, please feel free to get in touch with me or Bella. We're always happy to organize more workshops like this as spaces for discussion. Thank you, everyone, and see you all soon.